everybody. Welcome to Tech Talks from Agile IT for June 28th. Today we'll be joined by Matt Soseman, security architect from Microsoft. He'll be talking today about ransomware threats and some of the tools we have available to avoid it. Shortly, we should be being joined by a special guest. Dan Chemistruck is going to be joining us, the old host of Tech Talks. He's also scheduled in about 2 weeks for another presentation as well. So he'll be here to answer questions during the Q&A period. So Matt, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Matt Soseman, a security architect at Microsoft. I live in San Diego. Right now, looking outside where it's blue skies and sunny weather, so looking forward to the weekend. But thank you very much for having me here today. Really looking forward to speaking with you all about ransomware.
Thanks a lot, Matt. I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter now. And as always, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask those in the questions panel in GoToWebinar, and we will go ahead and answer those after the presentation. Take it away, Matt.
Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And if you don't mind, just let me know once.
I'm seeing it. Looks good.
Perfect. All right. Well, again, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you may be. Really excited to talk to everybody today about ransomware and rapid cyber attacks. As Sean mentioned, I'm a security architect at Microsoft, and I assist our partner community and their customers with helping them to defend against cybersecurity attacks, helping them to decrease their security risk and increase their posture, if you will, within their organizations. And so rapid cyber attacks is something I'm pretty passionate about and really excited to share with all of you here today. So I have a slide deck here that I'll be making available to Sean, and there's some really great slides in here. If you want to have any of these for a reference, just let us know. And let's go ahead and get started. So I have a slide here I want to start off with, and I want to set the stage for everyone. When it comes to cybersecurity, times have really changed. These are not your teenagers in their parents' basement, right, initiating these attacks. These are not people that are just doing this part-time for fun, right? These are people that are nation states. These are other corporations. These are activist groups that are very well funded that are out there trying to exploit your company, trying to exploit your organization. And they're really after one thing, and that one thing is your intellectual property. And so if you're in the business of making money, you have something that these attackers want. If you have a secret formula to something, if you have any type of IP at all, or even a bank account number where they can wire transfer money from, that's what these attackers want. So it's really important for us to understand their mindsets and how they're motivated. And really, it's around money. Now, some of these attackers, they are motivated around activism, if you will, and a particular mission for a nation state, but most of the time it's around money. And even with nation states, it's they're trying to steal your intellectual property so that they can compete against you in the global market and develop their economies over in their part of the world. So these are all things we really have to think about when it comes to cybersecurity. And these are really, really talented individuals. We can't let that escape us. And these are individuals that are so talented that it's becoming very hard to try to combat this. And that's where we need technology to assist here. And so I wanted to put this slide here because I think it has some good statistics here as well. Around 82% of successful attacks are coming from email phishing, scans of your network, and just being able to compromise your website. And for me, that's low-hanging fruit. And those are, basically three things that if we were to improve our security posture in those three things, it would probably decrease your risk quite a bit. So one thing that we really need to understand also here when it comes to these attackers is their preparation and knowledge. They spend a lot of time studying their targets. So for anybody who's on the call, if I look you up on LinkedIn and I look you up on Facebook or Twitter, but LinkedIn's probably a good example because just about everybody now in the working world is on LinkedIn. So if I look you up, I'm going to look at what you've been sharing. What news articles have you been commenting on? What posts have you been commenting on? What does your profile look like? What companies have you worked for? What job roles and titles have you held? And I'm going to build a profile on you. And then based on that, I might do a Google search or a Bing search on you and figure out a little bit more about your personal life. I may figure out who's in your network and go look up their pages and figure out if there's a photo posted of you. So I'm doing a lot of preparation to figure out who you are so then I could social engineer you so I know what type of attack to launch. I know when to launch. I know exactly how to launch it. So if you're a CEO of a company or an executive or an accounts payable person, somebody who is a valuable target, I'm going to be very, very prepared. And so the problem with all this is that us in IT, if you will, the analysts, we are very unprepared. We don't know who's attacking us. We don't have visibility into what types of attacks are happening and when they strike or how often they occur. And so there's a statistic out there that on average, about 140 days goes by without you detecting a hacker in your network. So in other words, I could be at your house, sitting on your couch for 140 days without you ever even knowing, listening to the conversations between you and your spouse, drinking your beverages out of your refrigerator, and you would never know about it. And so this is really scary stuff, and it's very real. And so we need to figure out how do we protect ourselves against this. And so the way we do that is by really assuming that we've already been breached. And when we assume that we've been breached, this is where things start to get interesting. And we can go through and make sure that we're running actual testing on our environment, whether it's penetration testing or we're looking at login and we're actually monitoring activity that's happening in the environment. And so it's really just a change in mentality. And this is what's going to help us to better protect ourselves in the long run. So with that being said, let's talk about ransomware. I wonder if anybody on the call has ever seen this. No need to comment or come off mute or put in the chat window, but kind of keep that to yourself. But if you have seen this, though, you'll know that's kind of a scary thing. This is an example of a crypto locker. In other words, ransomware. And so I usually can get this from an attachment in an email, going to a website, maybe just going to a news website and getting hit with a rogue piece of ads. And it installs code in my computer. It encrypts everything on my computer, the whole entire hard drive, and to the point it's unusable. And I can't even get into Windows, and I see this. And so in order to get my data back, I have to pay a ransom. So this one, it's kind of generous, around $300 worth of Bitcoin to the following wallet ID here. But this is an example of ransomware. And unless you have a good backup and recovery strategy in place, and you're storing data locally on this PC, it's going to be a very bad day. And so how do we protect ourselves against seeing this? How do we protect our systems, whether it's a user's PC or an Active Directory domain controller or a database server? How do we make sure that we limit their risk of being hit by ransomware? And so that's what we're going to talk about here for the next half an hour or so. I want to make it real, though, and help you understand the global impact of ransomware. If you have offices around the world, you'll notice that ransomware here over the last couple of years is growing in other parts of Europe and especially Eastern Asia, but it's also growing in the United States. And so it's a very, very real thing. And at Microsoft, I see and hear stories of this just about every day. And these are big businesses. These are big money makers for these attackers. If you remember about this time last year, I think it was last summer, Petya and WannaCry, those were huge. And when they hit, they took down some businesses. And as you see here, it cost a lot of money to be able to restore from those attacks. And so it's a very real thing. It's, it's kind of, do we want to pay now or pay later type of thing. And so what I found interesting here about WannaCry and Petya was what it did for the Department of Health service over in the United Kingdom. Over there, ransomware, these two versions of it, Petya and WannaCry, they hit the critical health systems. They hit everything from blood pressure machines to x-ray machines to heart monitoring to you name it, to the point where it took down the entire health system in the UK. So hospitals were not able to help people who were having heart attacks, delivering babies, anything. They were shut down. And so it's a life or death situation at that point. So it's very, very real. And if we take a look at this, these are getting really sophisticated. Again, I mentioned before, these attackers, they're very skilled. And we even see them now using artificial intelligence and machine learning and using the cloud as ways to increase the sophistication. And so these are all things that we need to kind of fight back against, of course, but just as an example here, they're going out and not only encrypting your hard drive, but they're also stealing your username and password. So just imagine if you're using that same computer to log into all of your personal bank accounts and other websites, right? They're stealing those credentials in addition to the corporate credentials as well. And they're moving throughout the environment from machine to machine, of course, but they're also trying to find more valuable assets to you, like an Active Directory domain controller. And if I hit that Active Directory domain controller, I have keys to the kingdom. We're doing network scanning. It's also doing some destructive behavior around, of course, encrypting the hard drives. And what's interesting about ransomware is there's no guarantee that you paying the ransom will actually unlock your data. There's no guarantee for that. Now, it's kind of a bad business decision on the attacker's part if he doesn't provide that, but there's no guarantee. So sometimes paying it may not even work. And so we call ransomware and these type of attacks that really have this type of behavior rapid cyber attacks. And again, these are very, very rapid. They could spread across the environment in a matter of minutes. If you look back at Petya and WannaCry, that's exactly what happened. The first time it got introduced into just an organization like DHS, within a matter of minutes, it's moved around to all the machines and all the devices to encrypt them and do these other malicious things on them. They're automated. Not just scripted based, but we're starting to see these actually leverage cloud technologies, and as I said, machine learning and AI to be smarter. And so they're adapting to the environments that they go into. And again, they're very disruptive, right? I talk about encryption. I've seen ransomware with a few customer cases that it's just destructed the hard drive, right? It's like doing a format on your C drive. The data's just gone. And so these things are really nasty. And if you look back at Petya, this was based on an exploit, right? On a vulnerability. And there was an argument that it wasn't really holding data for ransom. It was actually just wiping data clean, as I talked about. And if you get some time, if you're like me and you really are interested in security, but also just kind of technology in general, check out Petya a little bit more and look into it, because it was actually kind of an ingenious piece of malware here. And so what this did was, it wasn't even part of email phishing. It wasn't part of the browser itself or hitting websites. It was actually introduced by the IT supply chain. And so it was automated to the point where it had multiple techniques to get into the environment. It didn't rely on just one vector, if you will. And the impact on this, it was just completely massive. As you see here, it replaced the boot record. So you couldn't even boot up the machine, right? Whether it's a Windows machine or it's a IoT device, right, running a heart monitor for a patient, this thing was extremely nasty. And so if you peel back the onion on the Petya attack, it had multiple different parts here. And so when you first run the code, it actually downloads additional code. So you're basically just running the installer, and then it downloads the rest of the code. And then from there, it's doing 4 different things. It's going out and finding exploits in what we call SMB. So it's trying to find those vulnerabilities on the local network with those machines that are on the local network. It's also scanning all of those machines and stealing credentials. It's also going through and scanning those machines and trying to figure out what files are on those machines, and then uploading those files to a command and control server. And then it's going through, of course, all those files again and encrypting them. So it did multiple different things. And what's really scary here for me is not that it encrypted the hard drives and made them unusable. That's scary, but it's transmitting that data back to a command and control server. So again, that intellectual property that you may have, it could be in the hands of somebody else, which could be sold in the black market to one of your competitors. So some really interesting things to think about. So how do we defend against this stuff? Well, we do have an easy button, and it's really 4 key strategies, and I'll talk more about that here in just a moment. Um, but it is challenging, especially when I'm on a limited budget. And I'm not going to make this stuff up for you, but there is no silver bullet. Um, but there are some quick wins we can do. Nothing is 100% secure, and it never will be. But there are some things that we can put in place to make it more expensive for these attackers to try to compromise your environment, to try to encrypt your data and steal your data and credentials. So we want to make it as expensive as possible, but we also want to make it to the point where your risk is decreased by just putting some really basic things and strategies in place. And so that's that 4-step process I mentioned before. Starting with exploit mitigation. One of the best things that we can do is make sure that we are on the current version of all the software that we have in the environment. And typically that starts with my client PCs, right? Or if I'm using Mac, or if I'm using Linux, whatever that end user is using as their computer, making sure that that operating system is up to date and current. So if I'm on Windows 10, making sure I'm on the latest Windows build, making sure I'm completely patched. And then any software that runs on that computer. So whether it's a web browser or or Microsoft Office or Flash or a line of business app or any of those pieces of software, making sure that those are patched and up to date on their latest updates. Because a lot of these ransomware components will try to find those vulnerabilities and exploit those vulnerabilities. And so immediately just by patching my operating systems and my software on those machines can greatly increase my posture and reduce my risk. And I wouldn't start there. You also want to consider network routers, network switches, really anything that runs software on it, making sure that those are up to date on the latest firmware. So once we get everything patched in the environment and we have a good strategy in place around how we patch that, right? Then we roll out our business continuity and disaster recovery plan. And I know that sounds kind of complex. And so just to break that down, it's really our backup plan. So that involves a few different things. That might involve a strategy around helping my end users to adopt a new behavior. So rather than saving files locally on my computer, maybe I save them on OneDrive, or I save them in some kind of a cloud file storage location. So that way, if my computer does get lost or stolen or hit by ransomware, that data is saved in another location, and I can easily get to it. But then making sure that data is backed up, of course. And so if I have a file server that's out there, if that gets by ransomware, that could generate a bad day for me. So making sure that data is backed up, having that good backup strategy, but then testing those backups and making sure I have a good recovery strategy as well. In the news over the last 6 months or so, we have seen some ransomware hit. And one of the interesting things was they had a backup, but it took them weeks to restore that data. And so those organizations were essentially shut down for weeks at a time while they restore that data. And some of those backups, they might not even have been available or even ready to actually be ran. So, and what I mean by that, maybe they're corrupted. So all things to think about here. And then the next one, lateral traversal and securing privileged access. If I get hit by the Petya malware here on my computer, well, as you saw in that previous slide, it traverses the network and tries to find other valuable assets. Well, making sure that I have a good strategy in place so that malware cannot traverse the network. In other words, being able to minimize administrator rights, being able to minimize permissions on things, being able to segment things so that if we do get hit, that attack surface, if you will, is greatly reduced. And that leads us to the next one, attack surface reduction. And so this is also around taking a look at what type of software is being ran in the environment and kind of doing a risk versus reward planning vision on that. And looking at our images on our computers, or just looking at the software we install on our client computers. Do we really need that software? Is there another way of doing that? Because each piece of software that you run, that increases your attack surface because that's additional code that's running, that's additional code that has to be patched and all of those things. And so attack surface reduction is really around minimizing the type of software that needs to be ran on a client computer, but also looking at other things across the environment and trying to minimize my risk. And so that's a much broader conversation, but this is our 4 key components of that mitigation strategy to help us reduce our risk of getting hit by ransomware. Okay. So Microsoft key recommendations. So at Microsoft, we do have some recommendations that we make around minimizing your risk with ransomware. And as I mentioned before, probably the number 1 item here is around destruction-resistant backups, right? So not only having that tape backup or that offline backup of some sort, but making sure I have a copy of that, making sure it's in an offsite somewhere. If it's being stored in the cloud, making sure I have that plan B of where else I can get access to that data. Immediately deploy my critical security updates. So I need to have that strategy in place so that when those critical updates come out for Windows or Office or Google Chrome or the firmware on my internet router in my wiring closet, that I have a strategy to deploy those immediately. And by immediately, I mean within a day or 2. Being able to isolate or retire computers that cannot be patched or updated. So if for some reason I have that Windows XP machine that's sitting out there and I have a line of business app running on it, I don't want to change it, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it. Completely understand. But how do I isolate that so that if it does get hit by ransomware, it minimizes the impact to the rest of the environment? We'll talk about advanced email and browser protections in a moment. Enable anti-malware on those machines, being able to get real-time blocking from the cloud, so something like Windows Defender and Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. Implement unique local administrator passwords. So on every single Windows PC, do we have a unique local administrator password on those and not using the same administrator password across all my machines? And then be able to separate and protect those privileged accounts. And by that, I mean, if anybody who's on the call here listening in, if you're a global admin in Office 365 and you get hit by ransomware and I steal your credentials, I have keys to the kingdom. I can log into any mailbox and I could do a lot of destruction and gain access to a lot of data. If I'm a domain admin, so for my folks on the phone that are running Active Directory on premises, and you're also a domain admin, and you get hit by ransomware and I steal your credentials, again, you have keys to the kingdom. So being able to minimize who has privileged access to these systems and being able to separate your standard user access versus the privileged account. So if you're that domain admin, creating a separate account just for domain admin use and not using your standard user account to access those valuable assets. And so on the left side, these are just things that we should look at around over the next 30 days when we start to roll out the strategies, what can be done in 90 days, and then kind of more of that longer term roadmap. Because none of this can be done immediately, and we're not asking you to do it immediately, but having that roadmap and strategy in place to help you with that. Now, we do have some additional recommendations as well, of course, and some of this you may find a little out there, but if you look over history here in the last 5 years and you look at some of the biggest cyber attacks that have occurred that have really hit the news, one of them comes to mind that it wasn't actually that company that got hit, it was their vendor that got hit. And because their vendor got hit and they had access to all the intellectual property and all of the right data, their customer, that big company that was in the news, also got hit. So really reviewing who your vendors are, who are you outsourcing to? If you're outsourcing to a marketing agency or a call center for your IT help desk or customer service or what have you, how are they protecting your IP and how are they protecting access to your network? Moving critical workloads to software as a service and platform as a service up there in the cloud to be able to take advantage of those advanced security capabilities that you may not be able to do on premises. Validating your existing network controls, enabling secure boot on those Windows workstations. There's some things here around securing privileged access and the SPA roadmap. Protecting the backup and deployment systems. So being able to ensure that those backups of your data are protected and have good integrity. And then all these other things around application whitelisting, removing local administrator privileges from end users. Being able to disable unneeded passwords, all these different things can definitely help you to minimize your risk. We also have another tool that's out there that is available called the security baselines. And so this is great. As an IT professional, I try to share this with all my other IT professional peers out there in the industry. Take a look at this. This offers some really interesting ways to just come up with that security baseline for your organization and to make sure that you're aligned with Microsoft recommended practices and help to stay secure. So I have a website link down there at the bottom of the page, aka.ms/security baselines, if you're curious to learn more about that. Okay, let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about how Microsoft can help. So I'm going to let this slide build out a little bit. And as you know, Microsoft, we're involved in a lot of different products, a lot of different industries, and we do a lot of different things. And because we do all of these different things, we have extremely large visibility across all these different platforms that gives us access to telemetry and pieces of data. And by doing that, we have a very large understanding of the context behind all of this. And so what I'm trying to say here is by having access to this data that is collected through Bing and Azure Active Directory and Office 365, we can help to develop threat profiles on those attackers and to better protect our customers that are also subscribers of Office 365 or customers that purchase Windows or Azure or customers that use Bing, etc. And so if you boil all this down, it comes down to what we call the intelligence security graph. And this is where all that data is coming in. And here's just a few of those data points. I want to call out two specific data points here. The first one is around Bing. So if I get hit by a phishing email and I click on that link, and that link is malicious, it takes me to a malicious website. Well, Bing, we're scanning 18 billion web pages every month. And we know what those malicious websites look like. And so we're actually able to protect you from even browsing to that website to begin with. So when you get hit by that phishing email, you may not be able to browse to it at all. And then over on the right, 450 billion monthly authentications. So we know what the bad guys look like when they try to steal your username and password and log in. We know what impossible travel looks like. So if Matt Soseman's logging in from San Diego, California right now, but a minute later he logs in from somewhere over in Asia, that's impossible travel. There's no way I can get there in that amount of time, and so that'll be flagged, if you will. We even do something that a lot of folks don't know about. We scan the dark web for stolen credentials. So if you're a subscriber to Office 365 or Azure Active Directory, we will actually compare the database of all of the millions of accounts in Office 365 against the marketplaces out there in the dark web. And if we find your credentials up for sale, we give IT and you the power to disable those accounts. And so there's some really interesting things that we can do here with this data that we pull in and all this telemetry and signal that we pull in. And what that enables us to do is have some really robust products and features and services here that help to make you better protected and have a better security posture. So everything from being able to protect you through email and web browsing to protecting the actual endpoint, whether it's a Windows machine or a Windows Server machine, to protecting identity. Folks often hear me say a lot that all roads lead to identity, and that's very true. If I get hit by ransomware, as I mentioned with Petya, it went out there and stole your credentials. Again, if you have keys to the kingdom, if you're a global admin or a domain admin, or even just the CEO of a company, identity is everything. If I have your username and password, it's game over. And so we want to make sure that identity is our first line and last line defense. And then some other things here around backup and recovery and being able to do some advanced intelligence gathering and being able to detect some of these advanced threats. So probably the first one here that I would consider low-hanging fruit is that if you are a Office 365 customer, we have a feature called Advanced Threat Protection. And so what this does is every attachment that comes in, and you can see this in the screenshot there behind that first screenshot on the left, every attachment that comes in in an email, we will scan for malicious code and malware. And the way we do that is we actually create virtual machines in the background. And these virtual machines might have Windows 10, Windows 7, Windows XP, They might have Office 2005, 2003, Office 2012, Office 2016 installed. And so this Word document that might be in my attachment, we're executing that attachment, that Word document on all these different virtual machines to try to figure out if it's a real document created in Microsoft Word, or is it a Word file that has a macro or malicious code that can harm your PC. And so here's an example of where we found a attachment to have malicious code and we simply blocked it. So in that case, the user can never actually click on that attachment. And if they try to click on it, they'll just be presented with this message that your attachments were found to be unsafe. And of course, IT have a lot of reporting control behind the scenes on all this, but it stops the user in their tracks. And then the second part to this, that big red screen here you see on the right, is phishing emails. If you get a phishing email and it has a link to a website in it, and you click on that link, it goes out to the website, well, again, with that intelligent security graph, we know what those malicious websites are. And so when you click on that link and it's indeed malicious, we will stop you right in your tracks and we'll warn you that this website is malicious. And you won't be able to continue your browsing onto that website. So just by having some really low-hanging fruit, if you will, protection capabilities in place actually could help to decrease some of these threats in your environment and increase your security posture. Now, if you take a look at the Petya malware that we talked about earlier, and you also look at the different security technology built into Windows 10, and we overlay that, you'll see that we actually could have protected ourselves against Petya had Windows 10 been in the environment with these different features enabled. So as you see here, from actually blocking that malicious software from being downloaded in the first place, could have been protected by Device Guard, Secure Boot to prevent Petya from changing the master boot record, being able to exploit SMB could have been done by kernel hardening built into Windows 10. Credential theft could have been prevented through Credential Guard. Encrypting of the actual files on the computer could have been prevented with controlled folder access in Windows. And then running that code could have been prevented from Device Guard. So as you see, this actually could have helped to even prevent Petya from ever running an environment in the first place. And then we have some advanced controls here so that if I do happen to have malware running in that environment and it's ransomware, I do have some advanced controls through Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, a cloud-based service that allows me to have visibility into all those different threats in my environment. And here you can see an example of what that dashboard looks like. And I can see across all of the machines in my environment if they have malware, what type of malware, and being able to quarantine them and then take further action. And in some cases, take action automatically. And so here in this screenshot, I could see exactly where a user was trying to copy a file, and that was flagged as suspicious because that's outside that user's normal behavior. So now we're using machine learning to tell us when a user is doing something that they typically don't do. And you're probably wondering, well, Matt, so what? Well, the so what here is if I'm an attacker and I compromise your computer and I'm trying to copy your data off so I can go and save it somewhere else so I can look at it later, that's suspicious. And we're flagging that, and we can even stop that. All right. So I talked about securing privileged access earlier. This is a great slide here that we took from a link, aka.ms/privsec. So if you're interested more in learning about securing privileged access roadmap, this is a great resource. But this is all around how do we protect those users with elevated permissions in the environment, whether you're a domain admin or a global admin in Office 365, how do we help to protect against that? Some of this involves our Active Directory domain controllers. Some of this involves more of a soft strategy that's not technical at all, but more of a business process. The biggest thing we could also do to help protect ourselves is by enabling multi-factor authentication or two-step or two-factor authentication. And so here's an example of when I go to sign into Office 365 or log into a line of business app inside my organization, I can get prompted on my smartphone and on my smartwatch to approve that login. So that's my multi-factor authentication. So if you have a bank website, like I use Bank of America, every time I log into bankofamerica.com, it sends me a text message. I type in the code from that text message into the website, and now I gain access. So there's two factors there. Same thing here. And this makes it just really frictionless and easy to gain access to my tools I need to do my job, but helps to protect against those attackers from stealing my credentials and doing harm. And so there's some additional things here that I can do around Azure Active Directory and being able to protect those identities. I talked before about how we scan the dark web. So this is where I can go through and leveraging machine learning, apply policy. So if we do find any accounts in your company, in your environment, that are up for sale on the dark web, we can automatically block the use of those accounts and then notify you as the admin or notify IT to then go out and take an action on that. And so that's just one capability here. I talked about impossible travel. So maybe if we detect possible travel, hey, we'll ask for multi-factor authentication, or we'll ask you to reset your password, right? So there's some ways to automate this that can really help to protect those identities. And of course, giving you visibility around all of this. Using Cloud App Security is another tool here in the Microsoft security portfolio. This allows me to create a policy, and an example here is around ransomware. So what if my computer gets hit by ransomware and I'm using OneDrive for Business or Dropbox or Google Drive? And when my computer gets hit by ransomware, it also encrypts the files in that sync client for OneDrive or Google Drive. Well, all the files in the cloud now, because they synced, will also be encrypted. Cloud App Security prevents that. Cloud App Security will look at those files that are being synchronized, and if it contains file extensions that are known to be associated with ransomware, it will actually stop the sync. So again, another layer we could put in place to just make it more difficult for these ransomware attacks to take place. And for advanced threat analytics, this is really interesting. The scenario I like to give for this is I send you a phishing email, you click on that link, you go to a website and it's a fake website of some sort and you type in your corporate username and password. I now have that corporate username and password. I can now log into any business app on your behalf and you would never know about it. There's no way to detect that unless you have something like this. So this allows you to detect that suspicious behavior, because for you may not normally log into an Active Directory domain controller or to a like QuickBooks or some kind of financial app. But if I'm an attacker and I steal your credentials, I may start logging into those devices and those applications. This detects that abnormal behavior. It allows you to take action. So some really interesting stuff here. Okay, lastly, in the interest of time here, let's talk about backup and disaster recovery. So just an example, Microsoft's solution for this is called Azure Backup. So this allows me to back up data, whether it's a virtual machine running on Hyper-V or VMware, whether it's data in a SQL server. This could be on premises, this can be in the cloud. Backing up that data, it could even be just data sitting on your PC. I can back up your C drive. But being able to back up that data, we store that data in Azure. Now it's highly redundant. It's in a safe location, right? I don't have to worry about managing those backups. And I can then have access to that data and I can retire that data. I can retain it based on my legal policies, whatever that may be. And that gives me that good strategy around backup and recovery. Something that's really cool with Azure Backup here is when I go to recover that data, it's almost immediate. Very, very strong and unique product here. But I talked about before at the beginning of the presentation, at the end of the day, you need a backup and recovery strategy, because if you do get by ransomware and it encrypts your PC and you have sensitive or just your usual work data on that PC and nowhere else, you need a backup of that so you can easily recover and get on with your business. Azure Backup can help to provide that. Okay. One of the last slides here I do want to show, and then I'd like to open up for questions, is if you look across kind of the Microsoft stack, we have these three products: Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection, Windows Advanced Threat Protection, and Advanced Threat Analytics, which is actually being renamed to Azure Advanced Threat Protection. Well, each of these three products talk to each other. So if my user gets an email, they opens the attachments, or they click on the URL, and it happens to run code, well, Windows Defender will pick that up. And then if that code starts to traverse the network to try to gain access to other systems or applications, then Advanced Threat Analytics or Azure Advanced Threat Protection will then detect that and pick that up. And the cool thing about this is you can actually open up a console and see where Office 365 might have detected it or maybe not detected it. Same with Windows and same with Azure. So this just gives you that full visibility across the entire ecosystem here. So when you need to figure out how did your network get compromised, this gives you the tools and visibility to do that. So you can patch up those holes, do your recovery, and get on with your business. So I would love to talk to you more about this, and I can probably talk to you all day about ransomware. But at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Sean and see if there's any questions, either online or if anybody on the phone has any questions they'd like to ask.
Thanks a lot, Matt. That's a lot to absorb. We did have one question come in already, and that is, does Office 365 Advanced Threat Protection work if the user is using Outlook on the desktop?